Decoding Learning Differences with Kimberly Lavelle, and this episode is IEP Accommodations, Evaluating a Real IEP. So this is an accommodations list provided from a parent and who wanted some feedback, just a quick free look. So I'm actually going to be looking at this right now for the first time. So just a really quick perusal. I'm looking at it and I'm seeing there's a lot of accommodations here, which is great. I don't know exactly what the story is behind that. I don't know how long they've been in place, how well they're working. Like I said, this is not a client of mine. It's just someone I'm looking at as kind of like a fresh eyes. What am I seeing? What am I noticing? So there's a lot of accommodations here, which can be a really good thing. It's rarely a bad thing. Although there's, sometimes accommodations are a hindrance. So we have to be careful in how they're worded and when they're put in place and all of that. So you'll notice that this particular IEP page might look exactly like the IEP you have. If it does, that probably means that your district uses the same software for writing IEPs, or it's a web application, but it's SACE is the program. So it creates these pages like this. And what you'll see is there's these accommodations, who it's supporting, the start date and the end date, the frequency of the accommodation, the duration of the accommodation, and the location of the accommodation. Now, the frequency and duration are often kind of problematic in the way that they're written because accommodations don't happen the same way services do. It's not like every single day the kid needs to go get a service for 30 minutes. It's, well, if there's a reading test, the kid needs that accommodation, but there's not a reading test every day. But if there's a week of reading tests every day, you see what I mean? Like, the kid needs the accommodation whenever it happens, and that can be a little bit tricky and problematic in the way these are set up and worded. So just to keep that in mind. And then you'll see that to deal with that down here, they have things like as needed, which you're really not supposed to do. So that's one thing I noticed really quickly. But you have to be as close as you can be with the frequency and duration. Okay. So I'm going to go kind of chunk these and just go through them little by little. Get my face. So the first accommodation is something that's basically just required, at least it is in California, IEP at a glance, provided to all general education teachers. So, and not that it has to be at a glance, but every gen ed teacher needs to know what is on the IEP. IEP documents are a minimum of 20 pages usually, and sometimes more than 30 pages. The gen ed teacher is not going to read a 30-page document and figure out what is relevant to them. They're not going to retain what's important to them. There's a lot that they're doing. That's not their focus. So most of them are not interested in being handed a 30-page document. So programs like SACE create these IEP at a glances that allow just like a quick notes. So it'll list out all the accommodations all on one page. It'll list the goals really briefly for them to see what are the goals, what are the accommodations. And those are usually the biggest things, and the services. And those are the biggest things that the gen ed teacher needs to know. And it's just like a 2 to 3 page document that has all of that listed. It has eligibility information. It's like a Cliff Notes version of the whole thing, which is great because it has all of these accommodations on there. So I always, when I was a special ed teacher and a case manager, I would hand the IEP at a glance to a teacher, ask them to let me know if they have questions. Sometimes we would meet and go over it, especially if it was a more complicated case. But before I handed it to them, I would highlight all the things I really needed them to pay attention to. The accommodations that they really needed, that they were responsible for. And then I would follow up later to make sure that things were happening the way they were supposed to be happening and that they were remembering that was an accommodation and all of that. Because that's the biggest thing. If it goes into an IEP document and it's an accommodation that's supposed to happen in a general education classroom, and the gen ed teacher doesn't remember that it's supposed to happen there, or even worse, never knew it was supposed to happen there, it might not happen there. So people need to follow up. Ideally, that's the case carrier, case manager. But you as the parent can definitely do a lot to make sure that your kid is getting the accommodations they need. Okay, so that's that first one. Next one, multiple choice questions and possible responses to be read aloud. Sounds great. This is a child with dyslexia, so we wouldn't want them to have to read everything themselves. A lot of, even if you're testing comprehension, having things read aloud to you allows to really kind of separate out, are they understanding it? And just struggling to read the material. Like, can they understand a 4th grade text if it's read to them, or can they not, right? Like, we want to understand, we want to separate those things out, not just, can you read it, and then you're marked down on comprehension, but it was really because you couldn't read the text. Okay, access to number and letter lines. Okay, so this is one where I'm looking at some of these, like, maybe they have multiple choice tests for an hour twice a week. That seems kind of high, but okay. This is happening in a separate classroom, you'll notice. So it's not the gen ed class. This would be the student is being sent to a separate classroom in order to access that accommodation with multiple choice. The number and letter lines. Why only 30 minutes twice a day? I mean, it's not terrible, but like, they're probably doing math for more than 30 minutes. They're probably doing language arts for more than 30 minutes. I would think that this would be all day, every day. So that's one that kind of strikes me as, why not a higher frequency and longer duration? Or the same frequency, but a longer duration, 90 minutes at a time. Or once a day for the entire school day. Like, I don't know why you would take away the access to number and letter lines. So this is where things like that, like, and in reality, it's probably true that the kid just has access all the time, because it's like weird if you're like, oh, your 30 minutes are up, I'm taking it away. But so this is where this form and reality don't always line up very well. Okay, the next set, access to a pencil grip. So here again, you're seeing daily for written work. So this is a lot of times how I actually like to write things like this, is just like, when is it happening? It's not like a duration of time. It's when it's needed, but it's needed in this descriptive way. So it's not as needed, it's for written work, which I prefer. If you know how long it's going to happen, and again, you could just say, whatever the duration of the school day is, 360 minutes, 5 times a week, they have access to a pencil grip. Great. Repeat instructions and check for understanding. So this is difficult, because if you are saying as needed for this, who is deciding when it's needed? So I would want to be more specific on repeat instructions and check for understanding. So like here where they say for written work, I would want something similar. And I would say daily or twice a day for language arts and math assignments. Whatever it is, that the child tends to struggle with understanding the assignment, or whenever an assignment has been presented, maybe the kid is having trouble understanding directions when they're presented to the whole class. So every time an assignment is given, that kid needs the teacher to make sure that that kid understands it. So we want a better picture of why this accommodation is in place and when exactly it needs to happen. Again, a really great teacher is just going to do that for every kid every time, but there are terrible teachers. Not very many in comparison to the great ones. Most teachers are amazing, excellent, hardworking, devoted, all the things, just overworked. But we don't want to leave it up to chance. Like, we want to make sure the teacher knows when the kid needs it, because they might not realize the kid is struggling with that. Like, they might see it as, oh, the kid is being defiant and refusing to do the work, when really they just don't understand the work and don't want to ask you to repeat it because it makes them feel bad. So, repeat instructions and check for understanding. We want a little more clarity on when exactly that's happening. What is the situation in which the child needs that? The next accommodation here is sensory movement supports. Movement breaks, movement break cards, classroom helper, Go Noodle, alternative movement setting. I'm guessing this was put in by maybe an occupational therapist who is like, these are some things that really help this child with sensory stuff. It's supposed to happen 3 to 5 times daily, but then here it's or as needed. Well, which is it? Because if the teacher's like, oh, well, the kid didn't need it, and the kid really did need it, like, who is determining as needed? That's my issue with as needed. So it could be a little bit, and again, it's supposed to be a frequency. Like, it's supposed to be this many times daily is how this form is created. It's what the people who made the laws are, like, envisioning. The problem is there's also reality of what does that really look like in a classroom. And there are going to be times when the kid would be mad if you're like, okay, go do some Go Noodle. Your time for Go Noodle is now. It's like, well, I don't want to. Although I just noticed they also wrote it as Go Noddle. So that's a little typo. Not a huge deal. But, so we have to think about, like, when does that really happen? Like, what does that look like? And again, the case managers are overworked. The teachers are overworked. It is a systemic problem. There's a lot of issues, a lot that needs to be fixed. Okay. For your kiddo, you can be the one who is going through and analyzing this. Or we can do it together if you want my support. But we're going through it and you're looking, when does my kid need sensory and movement supports? Is it every 30 minutes because they only can handle sitting for 30 minutes and then they need movement? Is it after a lot of sitting writing, like intensive writing, they're going to need a break right after that? And how long is before the break? Like, how much writing do they have to do before the break? What exactly does it look like? Is it like a transition thing? Like, they do better if right before or right after a transition time when everyone is going from writing to math, that the kid gets 5 minutes of sensory break. Maybe they go do a sensory break while everyone is shifting around. That helps them regulate, and then they come in when everyone is already seated again, right? Like, what does it look like? What do they really need? Okay, next accommodation is reading strip and or providing verbal visual reminders to use pointer finger to track while reading. Those are two different things. I would not want to combine those. Which one does the child actually benefit from the most? Which is actually necessary? Maybe both. You know, like they had the number line available, accessible to the child, which ideally we want to increase that. But then this could be all day long or during reading tasks. You know, they have it daily during reading tasks. Sure, have the reading strip always available. But then you could have a separate accommodation that is reminders to use pointer finger or to use the reading strip. I would want to know, what is that actually looking like in the class? What is actually the one that would benefit the kid the most? Okay, the next one, pairing and instructions with visual supports, checklists. I'm not sure exactly what they mean here. Are they pairing the child with another student? Oh, pairing oral instructions. Sorry, I read and. Pairing oral instructions with visual supports, checklists. Yes, that is lovely. So the teacher is giving instructions to the entire class and then also has created a checklist for the child to then know, like, okay, these are the instructions. This is what I have to accomplish. Again, they've got this or as needed. So 3 to 5 times daily or as needed. I would rather see this as whenever instructions are given. That'd be the frequency is whenever instructions are given. And then the duration is really for the duration of the assignment. Like, if you're going to say 3 to 5 times daily, I don't want you to also say or as needed. Because it's not ever clear who is determining when it's needed. Like I've said before, that can cause issues. If we've determined that the kid does need it, that's why it's an accommodation in here, then we need to specify when it's being done. And it really should be with every time those instructions are given. Maybe that's happening about 3 to 5 times daily. Maybe it's happening 15 times daily. So that's where I prefer things like whenever oral instructions have been given. And yeah, it's extra work for the teacher. It is extra work for that general education teacher to like, okay, these are the things that you have to do. But if that teacher is putting it on a whiteboard, these are the things you have to do. Yeah, it's benefiting the kid the IEP is for. It's also benefiting every other kid. Or maybe they're putting it on a piece of paper, doing like, I don't know, if the document cameras, so like then they put it out, they write it out on a piece of paper. It's like the old projectors, but newer. And basically it takes a picture, projects it up there, and then you can hand the paper to the kid the IEP is for so they can actually check it off. So like everyone benefits from this checklist being created. As the teacher is giving the instructions, they can be writing out this checklist. Just an idea of how to make this actually work. So writing supports, adaptive paper, writing checklist, writing spacer. Again, this feels like a accommodation written by an occupational therapist. Daily during writing assignments. Yeah, I usually like everything separated out, but all of those are needed for every writing assignment, so I could see putting those together. That one's not a big deal to me. Okay, next, preferential seating in the classroom. Okay, this one is tricky. This is one where, so some of these are typed in by somebody. Like they've clicked other in SACE and they've typed in exactly what they wanted to say. There's also all these drop-down options, and this is one of those drop-down options that you can just check preferential seating, and people do it all the time. But again, how is preferential seating as needed? What does that look like? What preferential seating does the child need? So I actually don't like most of the drop-down options, because they're not very specific. And like preferential seating, what is the preference that child has? Like what seating do they need specifically? Maybe they need, like it says, closer to point of instruction. Is that what they need? Sitting close to the point of instruction. They get less distracted if they're up front. Maybe they need to be at the far back because they're very busy. And if they can be at the far back where they're not disturbing anyone, they'll just move, and they can actually focus perfectly and ignore the sea of movement in front of them. Like, they're fine with that. It depends on the kid, right? Sometimes it's like a wobble chair that they need, or maybe it's thinking about who they're sitting near. So again, 99% of amazing teachers are 99% of teachers are amazing. They're going to do this naturally anyway. But to protect the kid, to make it clear for any teacher who sees the kid or suddenly has the kid in their classroom, knowing exactly what kind of seating they need is really helpful. So again, I'm not comfortable with as needed for this because this is for a duration of the school day, not as needed. Frequency is every single day. Like it's not as needed. It's daily for the entire school day. Access to manipulatives, same kind of thing, like just basically all day, every day. But again, I want to know what manipulatives they mean. I'm assuming math manipulatives, but maybe not. Maybe it's letter tiles. Maybe it's, what are the manipulatives they need? And I would rather those be specified. They did already say like number line and letter line. Okay. And where are they going to be accessed? How are they needed? Anyway, so access, because sometimes like teachers are like, oh yeah, they have access. They're in the drawer over there. But the kid doesn't know that they have access. So that's another thing, is make sure that if your kid has something like this, that maybe you go with your kid to the classroom outside of school hours with the teachers, prearrange with the teacher, and you help your kids see these are the manipulatives. Or ask your kid, okay, where are the manipulatives? Great. do you use those? When do you use those? When can you use those? And have that conversation so that your kid knows you have access to these things whenever you need them. And because a lot of times kids will technically have access, but not really notice them or realize it or think about it. So we want to make sure that they're using what we've decided they need, and that's why it's an accommodation. Additional time for testing for all tests. I mean, as needed. I guess if they need more time, it's more clear, hopefully. I don't know. If there was one I wasn't going to fight, it'd probably be that. Like, I'm not going to fight as needed on that one because hopefully everyone would agree that the kid needs more time. They didn't finish in the allotted time. Most testing now is not timed, but there are still some things like the STAR testing has time limits on it, so. And they can extend the time limits. It's still timed, but it can be extended, so they have more time per question. So that would be one that I would definitely expect this kid to get that accommodation for STAR testing. Okay, separate setting for testing. Well, then I would specify when it would be needed, not as needed on that. Because it's not going to be clear on whether or not a separate setting is needed. I've actually found that as we've switched to computer-based testing, a lot of students don't need a separate setting. They're actually totally fine being in the gen ed class with everyone else because all the accommodations are built into the computer program that is testing them. And they often feel more comfortable being in that general education classroom with everyone else. Not everyone. There are those kids who don't access the accommodations well unless someone is sitting next to them. There are kids who I would sit next to them and for like a reading test, like starred reading, where I'm not allowed to read it to them. They have to read it so that because it's scoring how well they can read and understand combined. So I can't read that to them. I would sit next to them and have them read out loud to me so that they didn't just get click happy and like get a terrible score because they weren't actually reading it. And then they would get all excited because they were all of a sudden doing really well. So sometimes kids do need a separate setting for testing, but just be thinking about why and be more specific about when that's happening. Vision therapy, I'm curious as to when that's happening, how that's happening, why that's not a service, why it's an accommodation instead of a service. But if it's there, at least it's there. Access to reading windows, that was kind of mentioned above as the reading strip. So maybe this is like, that's an old accommodation, this is the newer one. Maybe we need to relook at that older one and delete it and just have this newer one if that's what we've decided the kid needs. Is the kid only reading for 30 minutes 4 times a day? I mean, that still seems like a lot, but just 30 minutes feels a little odd. It's mostly fine, maybe. I, again, would probably just say all the time. Like, we're not going to limit their access if they're at school. They should have their reading windows available to them, I think. I don't know. So I would kind of question why only 30 minutes 4 times a day, and what does that really look like? And should we write it differently in the IEP? Okay, so that is that accommodations page that we've gone over. Hopefully it gave you some insight and things that you can look at and think about. Like I said, that was just like a cold read for me. Like I hadn't really looked at this before. I had like cut and paste it to create where I could break it down and go by little by little. But I didn't really analyze those until just now. So I'd love to know your thoughts, and I'm hoping you got something out of it. If you want me to look at your IEP, whether it's goals, accommodations, services, any piece of the IEP that you're like, I'm not sure if this is right. I don't know if this is good. If you want to look at the whole thing in depth and really understand what's going on by getting background data and having conversations with you and all the things, and we can just like super analyze it, we can do that. You can email me, Kimberlyn@decodinglearningdifferences.com. If you want me to look for free, pick one thing you want me to look at, and if I decide to do it, if it's like, yeah, that's a good fit for the podcast, I will take a look at it and create an episode similar to this one. So you can also get this kind of feedback. Anything where I feel like, yeah, that would help everyone to take a look at that. Let's look at that. So if you want me to take a look, email it to Kimberlyn@decodinglearningdifferences.com, and you can just say free help, please, and let me know what's going on, and let me know what you want me to look at. If you send me the whole thing, I'm just gonna maybe look really fast and pick one thing to do an episode on. If it seems like a good fit, like I said. All right. You can also share stories with me. I love stories. I love any feedback you have. Kimberlyn@decodinglearningdifferences.com is all of that. Thank you. And I will see you again next week.